The November fog that had settled over Belgravia that evening seemed almost conspiratorial in its thickness, muffling the clip-clop of horses' hooves and casting the gas lamps into soft, amber halos. It was the sort of London fog that made secrets feel safer and lies easier to tell. Inside the grand Georgian mansion at number 47 Eaton Square, however, the atmosphere was one of crystalline clarity and glittering sophistication. Lady Evelyn Pemberton's annual charity soirée was in full swing, and the crème de la crème of London society had gathered to witness what promised to be the social event of the season. I confess that I had attended the evening with some reluctance, having been persuaded by my friend Hercule Poirot that such gatherings provided excellent opportunities for what he termed the study of human nature in its most revealing circumstances. Little did I know how prophetic his words would prove to be. The drawing-room of Pemberton House had been transformed into a veritable jewel box for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing rainbows across the silk-papered walls, while hothouse flowers filled every corner with their exotic perfumes. The assembled guests moved through the rooms like figures in some elaborate ballet, their conversations a carefully choreographed dance of wit, gossip, and barely concealed ambition. At the center of all this magnificence stood Lady Evelyn Pemberton herself, a woman whose beauty had been legendary in her youth and whose formidable intellect had only grown more impressive with age. Her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure that spoke of French influence, and around her throat lay the reason for this evening's particular excitement: the necklace of forgotten promises. The necklace was, by any measure, extraordinary. Its centerpiece was a sapphire of such deep midnight blue that it seemed to hold the very essence of a starless sky. Around this magnificent stone, a constellation of diamonds had been arranged with such artistry that they appeared to dance with their own inner fire. The piece had come into Lady Pemberton's possession through her late husband's family, carrying with it a history as complex and mysterious as its beauty was undeniable. The necklace, Lady Pemberton had announced to her guests earlier that evening, has witnessed more secrets than any confessor, and tonight it shall witness one more. Before the evening is through, I shall make an announcement that will, I believe, surprise you all. Among the assembled company, I'd already noted several individuals whose interest in the evening's proceedings seemed to extend beyond mere social curiosity. There was Sir Reginald Ashworth, the art collector, whose eyes seemed to calculate the necklace's value with each glance. Miss Diana Pemberton, Lady Evelyn's niece and presumed heir, appeared unusually agitated, her normally composed demeanor betraying an underlying tension that spoke of more than social anxiety. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, the family physician and longtime friend of the Pembertons, moved through the gathering with the careful attention of a man accustomed to reading the subtle signs of distress in others. His presence at such events was not unusual, but tonight there seemed to be a particular watchfulness in his manner that suggested professional rather than social interest. Perhaps most intriguing was the presence of Mr. James Whitmore, Lady Pemberton's solicitor, who had arrived from his chambers despite the lateness of the hour, carrying with him a leather portfolio that he guarded with unusual care. The timing of his visit, coinciding with Lady Pemberton's promised announcement, struck me as more than coincidental. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly aware of the undercurrents of tension that seemed to flow beneath the polished surface of the gathering. Conversations were interrupted by meaningful glances, and more than once I observed guests stealing surreptitious looks at the magnificent necklace that adorned their hostess's throat. It was precisely at 10:30 that the evening took its dramatic turn. Lady Pemberton had withdrawn momentarily to her private study to attend to some correspondence, leaving her guests to enjoy the musical entertainment provided by a string quartet. The room was filled with the gentle strains of Mozart when a sudden, sharp cry pierced the air. Miss Diana Pemberton, who had been standing near the study door, turned pale as marble. "Aunt Evelyn," she called out, her voice carrying a note of alarm that, instantly commanded the attention of every person in the room. The study door, which had been closed, now stood slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening, we could see Lady Pemberton's form collapsed upon the Persian carpet, her evening gown spread around her like the petals of some dark flower. But it was not this sight alone that caused the collective gasp from the assembled guests. The necklace of forgotten promises was gone. Where moments before the magnificent sapphire had rested against Lady Pemberton's throat, there was now only the faintest mark upon her pale skin, as if the necklace had been removed with considerable haste. The study showed signs of disturbance. Papers scattered across the desk, a crystal decanter overturned, its contents staining the Persian rug. Yet the French windows remained securely latched from within. Dr. Thornfield immediately took charge of the situation, kneeling beside Lady Pemberton to assess her condition. His examination was swift but thorough, and when he looked up, his face was grave. "She has been struck upon the head," he announced quietly. "The blow was severe, but she lives. We must summon the police immediately." As the reality of what had occurred began to settle upon the gathering, I found myself studying the faces around me with new interest. Each guest had been present in the drawing room when Lady Pemberton withdrew to her study. Each had opportunity, and as the evening's events had already suggested, several possessed motives that extended beyond mere social pleasantries. The fog outside had grown thicker, pressing against the windows like some living thing seeking entry. Inside Pemberton House, the glittering world of London society had been transformed into something far more sinister, a closed circle of suspects, each harboring secrets that the missing necklace might well have taken with it into the November night. It was then that I remembered Poirot's words about such gatherings providing opportunities for the study of human nature. As I looked around at the assembled faces, some shocked, some calculating, some carefully composed, I realized that before this night was through, we would all learn more about human nature than any of us had bargained for. The stage was set for a mystery that would require more than mere physical evidence to solve. It would demand a journey into the labyrinthine corridors of the human heart, where the most dangerous secrets are kept and the most desperate acts are born. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that before morning came, we would have great need of my friend Hercule Poirot and his remarkable little grey cells. The immediate aftermath of Lady Pemberton's discovery brought swift action from the household staff. Dr. Thornfield, having confirmed that the lady lived but remained unconscious from her head wound, supervised her careful removal to her bedchamber while issuing calm instructions for ice and clean linens. The police were summoned with all haste, and within a quarter hour, the measured tread of official boots could be heard upon the marble entrance hall. Inspector Bradshaw of Scotland Yard arrived with 2 constables, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who had seen too many crimes among the supposedly respectable classes. His grey eyes swept the assembled company with practiced assessment, noting the expensive evening wear, the nervous glances, and the way certain individuals seemed to avoid meeting his gaze directly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the inspector announced, removing his hat, "I must ask that no one leave these premises until we have completed our preliminary inquiries. This is now the scene of a serious crime." It was at this precise moment that the drawing-room door opened to admit a small, dapper figure whose appearance seemed almost theatrical in its precision. Every detail of his person spoke of meticulous care, from his patent leather shoes to his perfectly waxed mustaches. The newcomer paused in the doorway, his green eyes taking in the scene with the sharp attention of a jeweler examining a particularly complex setting. "Ah," said the small man, removing his hat with a flourish, "I perceive that I arrive at the moment most opportune. Inspector Bradshaw, is it not? We have met before, I believe, in the matter of the Kensington emeralds." Inspector Bradshaw's expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed resignation. "Mr. Hercule Poirot," he said with the tone of a man acknowledging an inevitable complication. "I might have known, but of course." Poirot beamed. straightening his tie with evident satisfaction. "Lady Pemberton, she had the goodness to telephone to me not 1 hour ago. She spoke of matters most urgent requiring the attention of the little grey cells. Alas, I arrived to find the tragedy has already occurred." Miss Diana Pemberton stepped forward, her composure admirable despite the evening's shocking events. "Mr. Poirot, my aunt mentioned that she had consulted you regarding a matter of some delicacy. She said you might call this evening, though we hardly expected." "The circumstances, they are most regrettable," Poirot replied, his eyes moving systematically around the room, cataloguing each face with the precision of a portrait artist. "But now that I am here, perhaps I may be of service to Inspector Bradshaw in his investigations." The inspector's expression suggested he would prefer to conduct his inquiry without such assistance, but years of experience had taught him the futility of arguing with the Belgian detective. "Very well, Mr. Poirot, but this is my case, and it will be conducted according to proper police procedure." "But naturally," Poirot agreed, though his slight smile suggested he had his own ideas about procedure. "Now then, if I may observe, we have here the perfect closed circle, no? All present when the crime occurred, none able to leave, the study locked from within." His gaze moved deliberately from face to face. "Sir Reginald Ashworth, the connoisseur of beautiful objects, Miss Diana Pemberton, the devoted niece, Dr. Thornfield, the trusted family physician, Mr. Whitmore, the man of law with his mysterious portfolio." Each person named felt the weight of those green eyes, and I observed the subtle reactions: Sir Reginald's slight stiffening, Diana's quick intake of breath, the doctor's professional composure, the solicitor's tightened grip on his leather case. "And the necklace," Poirot continued conversationally. "This necklace of forgotten promises. It was valuable, was it not?" "Extremely so," Sir Reginald replied, his voice carefully controlled. "I'd been admiring it earlier this evening. The central sapphire alone would command £15,000, possibly more to the right collector." A collective intake of breath greeted this figure. £15,000, a sum that might drive men to desperate acts. £15,000, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. A considerable motive for theft, one might say. But tell me, mesdames et messieurs, was it truly theft that occurred here tonight? Or was it something else entirely, something that required the necklace to disappear, but for reasons quite different from mere avarice? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implication. In the party silence that followed, I could almost hear the turning of mental wheels as each person considered what secrets they harbored, what fears they nursed, what desperate measures they might have contemplated. The game, as Poirot would say, had begun in earnest. Inspector Bradshaw, with the methodical efficiency that marked his years at Scotland Yard, immediately set about securing the scene. He dispatched constables to guard the study door and begin cataloguing the guests, while a photographer was summoned to document the crime scene. Poirot, meanwhile, observed these proceedings with the patient attention of a conductor watching his orchestra tune their instruments. "If you would permit, Inspector," Poirot said, adjusting his cufflinks with characteristic precision, "perhaps we might examine the scene before the formal questioning begins. Sometimes the physical evidence," she whispers secrets that witnesses forget to mention. The study, when we entered, presented a tableau of elegant disorder. The scent of jasmine that typically accompanied Lady Pemberton had been replaced by something else entirely, the faint but unmistakable fragrance of violets. Poirot's nostrils flared slightly as he noted this detail, his green eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a jeweler examining a precious stone. "Most interesting," he murmured, approaching the overturned crystal decanter. "The pattern of the spillage, it suggests not accident, but struggle. And here," he indicated the silver inkwell on the desk, its rim bearing a dark smudge. "Lady Pemberton wore gloves this evening, did she not, Hastings?" "Long white ones," I confirmed, "quite pristine when she withdrew to the study." "Then we must ask ourselves," Did their whiteness remain unblemished? His gaze moved to the scattered papers. And these documents, they were not merely disturbed, but searched through, no? Mr. Whitmore, the solicitor, shifted uncomfortably in the doorway, his leather portfolio clutched against his chest like a shield. Inspector Bradshaw noticed the gesture immediately. "Mr. Whitmore," the inspector said sharply, "you had business with Lady Pemberton this evening. What was the nature of that business?" The solicitor's face reddened. "I must invoke solicitor-client privilege." "Even when your client lies unconscious from a criminal assault," Bradshaw interrupted. "I think not, sir. In matters of this gravity, privilege has its limits." Whitmore's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Very well. Lady Pemberton summoned me to execute a codicil to her will. Significant changes were to be made, effective immediately." A collective intake of breath greeted this revelation. Miss Diana Pemberton, who had been standing silently by the mantelpiece, went pale as marble. "Changes of what nature?" Poirot inquired with deceptive gentleness. The necklace of forgotten promises was to be bequeathed not to Miss Pemberton, as previously stipulated, but to a Miss Lila Roquefort. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Diana's composure cracked visibly, while Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed with sudden calculation. "Lila Roquefort," Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A singer of no connection to our family whatsoever." "Perhaps not to the family," Poirot observed, "but possibly to Lady Pemberton herself. Tell me, Mr. Whitmore, was this codicil the only business that brought you here tonight?" Lady Pemberton had also been receiving anonymous correspondence. She wished to discuss her concerns about certain threats. Dr. Thornfield, who had remained quietly professional throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke. "Evelyn mentioned those letters to me as well. She was quite distressed, convinced that someone in her household meant her harm." "And where might these letters be found?" Poirot asked. "I searched her personal papers after the attack," Diana said quickly. "I found nothing of that nature." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "How very convenient for someone, would you not agree?" As we moved to question each suspect individually, I observed Poirot's method with renewed appreciation. He sought not confessions, but reactions, the subtle tells that revealed more than words ever could. Sir Reginald, when pressed about his conversation with Lady Pemberton earlier that evening, admitted she had questioned him about the necklace's provenance. "She seemed to think I might know something about its history. The setting is distinctive, French work from the 1840s. Dr. Thornfield confirmed that Lady Pemberton had been increasingly anxious in recent weeks, suffering from insomnia and paranoia. She felt watched, threatened. As her physician, I was deeply concerned." Each interview revealed another layer of complexity, another motive, another secret carefully guarded. The missing necklace had become merely the visible symbol of deeper currents running beneath the surface of this elegant gathering. As Poirot concluded his preliminary questioning, I sensed that familiar shift in the atmosphere that marked the true beginning of his investigation. The pieces were arranged upon the board, each player's position established. Now would come the delicate work of psychological deduction that would ultimately reveal which among them had struck down Lady Pemberton and stolen the necklace of forgotten promises. The game, as my friend would say, was truly afoot. The preliminary questioning had established the basic framework of the crime, but Poirot's true investigation began with his characteristic attention to details that others might overlook. Before conducting formal interviews, he requested permission to examine Lady Pemberton's personal effects, a request that Inspector Bradshaw granted with barely concealed impatience. "The physical evidence, she whispers secrets that witnesses forget to mention," Poirot explained as we ascended to Lady Pemberton's bedchamber. The room retained the elegant order of a woman of impeccable taste, though the presence of Dr. Thornfield's medical supplies reminded us of the evening's violence. Mrs. Reeves, Lady Pemberton's maid, had carefully arranged her mistress's evening accessories. Poirot lifted the long white gloves with delicate precision, examining them in the lamplight. "Pristine," he murmured. "No ink stains, no dust, no trace of struggle. Yet Lady Pemberton wore these when she retired to her study." His attention turned to the crystal bottles on the dressing table, each perfume tested with the careful nose of a connoisseur. Jasmine, amber, bergamot. But not violets, he noted with satisfaction. "Mrs. Reeves, did your mistress ever wear violet perfume?" "Never, sir," the maid replied firmly. "Said it gave her headaches, something dreadful." Yet the study had carried the distinct fragrance of violets, a detail that Poirot filed away with evident pleasure. We returned downstairs to begin the systematic interviews that would form the backbone of his investigation. Miss Diana Pemberton was summoned first, her composure admirable despite the evening's trauma. She seated herself with practiced grace, though I observed the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her skirts. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began conversationally, "you were most devoted to your aunt, were you not?" "Exceedingly so. Since my parents' deaths, she's been everything to me." "And the necklace. You naturally expected to inherit this family treasure?" Diana's flush was barely perceptible, but Poirot's sharp eyes missed nothing. "It had been understood, yes, which makes tonight's proposed change so bewildering." "The letters, mademoiselle, the threatening correspondence Mr. Whitmore mentioned. You searched for these after the attack?" "I was concerned for Aunt Evelyn's safety. I looked through her desk but found nothing of that nature." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "How thorough was this search?" "I examined the obvious places. The desktop, the immediate drawers. Perhaps they were hidden elsewhere." Sir Reginald Ashworth entered next, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. His expertise proved invaluable in understanding the necklace's significance. "The piece fascinated me," he admitted. "The central sapphire is exceptional. Ceylon origin, I would venture. But the setting troubled me. Distinctly French work from the 1840s, yet the mounting appeared to have been altered in the Victorian era." "Altered, Sir Reginald?" "As if someone wished to disguise its original appearance. Lady Pemberton was most interested in this observation. She asked specifically about any connection to a family named Roquefort." This revelation sent a ripple of interest through the room. Poirot leaned forward with evident satisfaction. "And you knew of such a connection?" "The Roqueforts were prominent in Parisian society during the 1840s. There was some scandal, a daughter who fled to England under mysterious circumstances. Lady Pemberton became quite agitated when I mentioned this, spoke of promises that should have been kept." Dr. Thornfield's interview revealed Lady Pemberton's increasing anxiety in recent weeks. She felt watched, threatened, asked me to remain close this evening as if anticipating trouble, most unusual for a woman of her composure. Finally, Mr. Whitmore faced Poirot's questioning, his legal training evident in his measured responses. When pressed about the anonymous letters, he produced a revelation that cast new shadows over the investigation. "Lady Pemberton gave me copies of the threatening correspondence yesterday," he admitted, opening his portfolio. "She feared for her safety and asked me to hold them in trust." The letters, written in stark, angular script on expensive paper, directly contradicted Diana's earlier statement about finding no such correspondence. As Poirot examined them with gloved hands, the implications hung heavy in the air. "Most illuminating," Poirot murmured. "We have violet perfume where none should be, letters that exist despite claims to the contrary, and a necklace whose very history suggests secrets long buried." His green eyes swept the assembled faces. "The physical evidence whispers of deception, mes amis, but it is the human heart that shouts the truth. Before this night ends, we shall hear what it has to say." The fog outside had begun to lift, but inside Pemberton House, the mystery had only deepened, its solution hidden in the complex web of forgotten promises and carefully guarded lies. The examination of the threatening letters had established a crucial timeline, but it was the discovery of supporting physical evidence that seemed to seal Diana Pemberton's fate as the prime suspect. As Poirot carefully returned the correspondence to Mr. Whitmore's portfolio, Inspector Bradshaw's attention was drawn to a small detail that had been overlooked in the initial confusion. "Mrs. Reeves," the inspector called to the maid, who had remained nearby in case her services were required. "When you prepared Lady Pemberton's effects this evening, did you notice anything unusual about her personal items?" The elderly woman considered this carefully. "Well, sir, there was the matter of the gloves. Her ladyship always removed them immediately upon retiring to her private rooms, but tonight they were found still pristine in her study, and there was a faint scent in the air that seemed out of place." "What sort of scent?" Poirot inquired with sudden interest. "Violets, sir, quite distinct, but her ladyship never wore violet perfume, said it reminded her of funeral parlours and gave her the most dreadful headaches." This revelation prompted Inspector Bradshaw to conduct a more thorough examination of the guest's personal effects. When a constable returned from searching the lady's wraps and accessories, he carried with him a small crystal bottle that caught the light like a captured star. "Found this in Miss Pemberton's evening bag, sir," the constable reported. "Violet water, French-made and recently used by the look of it." Diana's face went ashen. "That bottle. I haven't used it in months. I prefer rose water, as anyone who knows me can attest. Someone must have placed it there." But Inspector Bradshaw was already building his case with the methodical precision of a man who had solved countless crimes through attention to detail. "Miss Pemberton, you were present when your aunt withdrew to her study. You claim to have searched for the threatening letters, but found none, yet Mr. Whitmore possessed copies all along. You had the strongest motive to prevent the codicil from being executed, and now we find violet perfume in your possession, the same scent that permeated the crime scene." The evidence continued to mount when a housemaid named Lily was brought forward, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I saw Miss Diana near the study door not long before the commotion. She seemed agitated, and there was that violet scent about her, something fierce." "I was concerned about my aunt," Diana protested, her voice growing desperate. She had been so anxious lately, and when she retired to the study with such urgency, I thought perhaps I should check on her welfare. Further examination of Diana's dark velvet evening wrap revealed a telling detail: a small stain along the hem that matched the ink from the overturned inkwell in Lady Pemberton's study. When confronted with this evidence, Diana's explanation grew increasingly strained. "I may have brushed against the desk when I discovered her," she admitted reluctantly. "Everything happened so quickly, and I was in such shock." Dr. Thornfield, who had been observing these proceedings with professional detachment, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "I must point out that Miss Pemberton's distress when she discovered her aunt seemed entirely genuine. As a physician, I have some experience in distinguishing between authentic shock and theatrical performance." But Inspector Bradshaw was unmoved by such character testimony. "Doctor, with respect, even the most devoted family members have been known to commit desperate acts when faced with financial ruin. The loss of inheritance, particularly one as valuable as the necklace of forgotten promises, could drive anyone to extremes." Sir Reginald Ashworth nodded gravely. "The necklace alone would have provided Miss Pemberton with independence for life. Its loss would represent not merely disappointment, but genuine hardship." As the weight of circumstantial evidence accumulated, Diana seemed to shrink into herself, her earlier composure completely shattered. The other guests regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, while Inspector Bradshaw prepared to make what appeared to be an inevitable arrest. It was at this moment that Poirot, who had been observing the proceedings with his characteristic air of detached interest, cleared his throat delicately. "Inspector Bradshaw, if you will permit an observation from these little grey cells, does it not strike you that this evidence presents itself rather too conveniently?" The inspector frowned. "Too conveniently. We have motive, opportunity, and physical evidence. What more do you require?" "Ah, but that is precisely the point," Poirot replied, his green eyes twinkling with familiar intelligence. "When evidence marches in such perfect formation, like soldiers on parade, one must ask who is commanding the review. The violet perfume in a bag where it does not belong, the inkstain positioned just so, the convenient witness, all pointing to the one person whose guilt would solve our problem most neatly." He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep the assembled faces with calculating precision. "But tell me, mes amis, if Miss Pemberton were truly guilty of this crime, would she not have disposed of such damning evidence? Would she not have prepared a more convincing alibi? The criminal mind that planned this evening's work was far more subtle than these clues suggest. The psychological game, I realized, was about to begin in earnest. Poirot's gentle but firm dismissal of the seemingly irrefutable evidence against Diana Pemberton created an immediate shift in the drawing-room's atmosphere. Inspector Bradshaw's confidence wavered visibly as he considered the Belgian detective's words, while the assembled suspects exchanged glances that spoke of renewed tension and uncertainty. "You suggest, Mr. Poirot, that Miss Pemberton has been deliberately framed?" the inspector asked, his tone betraying both skepticism and grudging respect for the little detective's reputation. "I suggest nothing yet, mon ami. I merely observe that when evidence presents itself with such theatrical precision, one must consider the possibility of a performance." Poirot straightened his tie with characteristic precision. "But let us examine this evidence more carefully, shall we? Inspector, if you would permit me to conduct a small experiment." Without waiting for formal permission, Poirot began his methodical examination of each suspect. "Your handkerchiefs, if you please," he requested with deceptive casualness. "A trifling matter, but sometimes the smallest details whisper the loudest truths." Sir Reginald produced a monogrammed square that carried the faint scent of bay rum. Dr. Thornfield's bore, traces of carbolic and lavender, professional and clean. Diana's delicate handkerchief was perfumed with the rose water she'd claimed to prefer. Mr. Whitmore hesitated before offering his immaculate linen, completely unscented. But it was not the handkerchiefs that held Poirot's interest. Instead, he lifted Whitmore's leather portfolio, balanced it delicately, and brought it close to his nose. "Curious," he murmured, almost to himself, before setting it down as though it were of no importance. "The hands. If you please," Poirot continued pleasantly. "The necklace of forgotten promises possessed a clasp of unusual subtlety. I'm told that careless handling leaves distinctive marks. It was a transparent bluff, but it served its purpose. I watched as each suspect offered their hands for inspection, noting the subtle reactions. Sir Reginald's quick attempt to rub at the base of his thumb did not escape Poirot's notice. Though the examination revealed nothing conclusive, Dr. Thornfield's fingers bore the small, neat punctures of his profession, while Whitmore's soft hands showed only a recent paper cut. Diana's hands remained steady and unmarked. "Most illuminating," Poirot declared with satisfaction. "Now, Monsieur Whitmore, these missing documents you mentioned, they concerned the necklace's original ownership, did they not?" The solicitor's discomfort was evident. There were discrepancies in some of the older papers. Documents that should have been present were missing, and certain signatures appeared to have been examined under magnification. "The Roquefort connection," Sir Reginald interjected, his expertise proving valuable despite his obvious nervousness. "As I mentioned earlier, there was a scandal involving a young woman from that family who supposedly fled to England under mysterious circumstances. Lady Pemberton seemed greatly troubled when I explained this history." Poirot's green eyes brightened with interest. "Ah, the promises that were forgotten, perhaps? Tell me, Dr. Thornfield, did Lady Pemberton ever speak to you of family obligations, of debts that transcended mere money?" Dr. Thornfield's professional composure showed the first signs of strain. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he adjusted his spectacles, a nervous gesture I hadn't observed before. Lady Pemberton was a complex woman, Mr. Poirot. She often spoke in riddles about the past, but I attributed this to the natural melancholy that sometimes affects women of her age. Natural melancholy, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. Or perhaps the weight of conscience. You see, mes amis, I begin to suspect that tonight's crime was not motivated by simple greed, but by something far more complex, a settling of accounts that has been decades in the making. The psychological pressure was deliberate and calculated. I watched as Poirot's penetrating gaze moved systematically around the room, studying each face with the intensity of a portrait artist, capturing not just appearance, but the very essence of character itself. Consider the violet perfume, he continued, his voice a silken thread weaving through the tense silence. Mrs. Reeves confirms that Lady Pemberton found such scents disagreeable. Miss Pemberton claims to prefer rosewater. Yet a bottle appears in her bag, and a housemaid conveniently remembers the scent about her person. Is this not the very definition of planted evidence? Diana looked up with desperate hope, though her voice remained barely above a whisper. Mr. Poirot, I swear to you I would never harm my aunt. She has been everything to me since my parents' deaths. Precisely what makes you so perfect a suspect, Poirot replied with gentle understanding. But the truly clever criminal does not leave such obvious trails. They craft a narrative that leads the authorities exactly where they wish them to go. His attention returned to Dr. Thornfield, whose discomfort had become increasingly apparent. Doctor, you prescribed sedatives for Lady Pemberton's anxiety, yet she refused them. Why do you suppose she felt the need to remain so vigilant? Paranoid delusions are not uncommon, Thornfield began, but Poirot interrupted with a raised hand. Ah, but were they delusions? Here we stand in the aftermath of precisely such an attack. Perhaps Lady Pemberton's instincts were more accurate than her physician credited. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I noticed how Dr. Thornfield's shoulders stiffened in response. The psychological game was deepening, and I sensed that before it concluded, more than one carefully constructed facade would crumble beneath the relentless pressure of Poirot's investigation. The little grey cells were not merely solving a crime, they were unraveling a web of secrets that stretched back decades, touching upon forgotten promises and buried guilt that someone had hoped would never see the light of day. The psychological pressure that Poirot had so carefully orchestrated was suddenly interrupted by a commotion in the entrance hall. Mrs. Reeves appeared in the doorway, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement mixed with apprehension. "Begging your pardon, Inspector," she said, slightly breathless from her haste, "but there's a young woman at the door. Says her name is Miss Lila Roquefort, and she's come in response to Lady Pemberton's urgent summons." The name struck the assembled company like a physical blow. This was the mysterious beneficiary mentioned in the proposed codicil, the woman for whom Lady Pemberton had intended to sacrifice Diana's inheritance. Her unexpected arrival at such a moment seemed almost supernatural in its timing, as if the very mention of her name had conjured her from the November fog. Miss Lila Roquefort proved to be a woman of perhaps 30 years, with the refined bearing that spoke of good breeding despite circumstances that had clearly reduced her to modest means. Her dark hair was arranged with simple elegance, and her traveling dress, while well maintained, bore the careful mending that spoke of genteel poverty. Yet there was something in her carriage, a dignity that no amount of financial hardship could diminish. "I received Lady Pemberton's telegram this afternoon," she explained, her voice carrying the faintest trace of a French accent that seemed to grow more pronounced under stress. "She asked me to come immediately, saying that tonight she would right a wrong that had persisted for far too long. I took the evening train from Dover." Inspector Bradshaw stepped forward with professional skepticism, clearly written across his weathered features. "Miss Roquefort, you claim to have received a telegram from Lady Pemberton. Might we examine this communication?" She produced the yellow paper from her modest reticule, and Poirot examined it with the careful attention he might give to a rare manuscript. The message was brief but urgent in its implications. Come at once. The necklace must be returned to its rightful owner. Tonight I fulfill my mother's promise. Evelyn Pemberton. Most illuminating, Poirot murmured, his green eyes bright with the satisfaction of a man whose theories were finding confirmation. And you understand, mademoiselle, the full significance of this necklace and Lady Pemberton's reference to promises? Miss Rochefort's carefully maintained composure faltered slightly, revealing depths of emotion that had been rigidly controlled. The necklace of forgotten promises belonged to my grandmother, Céleste Rochefort. She was forced to flee Paris in 1847 under circumstances that brought shame upon our family name. The necklace was all she managed to bring with her to England, but she was compelled to sell it simply to survive her first winter in exile. Sir Reginald's expertise proved invaluable in confirming this extraordinary account. The timing corresponds precisely with what I told Lady Pemberton earlier this evening. The Rocheforts were indeed prominent in Parisian society until some scandal, political I believe, forced the daughter into exile. The workmanship of the necklace setting supports this timeline. But it was Dr. Thornfield's reaction that commanded my closest attention. His face had drained of all color, and his hands, which had remained steady throughout the evening's previous revelations, now trembled visibly as he adjusted his spectacles. The arrival of Miss Rochefort had clearly affected him far more profoundly than it should have troubled a mere family physician. "Doctor," Poirot observed, with that deceptive casualness that I had learned to recognize as his most dangerous tone, "you seem remarkably troubled by this revelation. Perhaps you knew of the connection between these families." Lady Pemberton mentioned old obligations from time to time, but I never imagined the specifics." Thornfield's voice trailed off uncertainly, and I noticed how his gaze seemed unable to meet Miss Rochefort's directly. It was then that the young woman herself provided the key that would unlock one of the evening's most closely guarded secrets. "Dr. Thornfield," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of recognition that seemed to surprise even herself. "I know that name. My grandmother kept detailed journals throughout her exile, and she wrote extensively of a young English medical student who had shown her extraordinary kindness during her darkest days. Marcus Thornfield. He helped arrange her passage to London when she fled Paris, and later assisted her in finding suitable lodgings." The revelation struck the room with the force of lightning illuminating a previously dark landscape. Dr. Thornfield's connection to the Rochefort family was not merely coincidental, but deeply personal, stretching back decades to the original scandal that had driven Céleste Rochefort from her homeland. My grandmother wrote that Dr. Thornfield had promised to help her reclaim what was rightfully hers. Miss Rochefort continued, her eyes now fixed upon the doctor with growing understanding and what might have been accusation. She trusted him with information about certain documents that would prove her claim to properties that had been seized. But those documents were never used, and my grandmother died in poverty, still believing that justice would eventually prevail. Dr. Thornfield's professional composure finally cracked entirely under the weight of this decades-old revelation. The weight of Miss Rochefort's revelation struck Dr. Thornfield with the force of a physical blow. His carefully maintained professional composure cracked entirely, revealing decades of buried guilt and shame. When he spoke, his voice carried the tremor of a man confronting ghosts he had hoped would remain forever silent. "Céleste Rochefort was more than a patient to me," he admitted, his hands clasping and unclasping with nervous energy. "I was 23, idealistic, and she was beautiful, intelligent, desperately alone in a foreign country. I did help her escape Paris, and I promised, God help me, I promised to assist her in reclaiming her rightful inheritance." Miss Rochefort's eyes filled with tears, though her voice remained steady. "My grandmother spoke of you often, Dr. Thornfield. She never stopped believing you would honor your promise, even as poverty consumed what little strength she had left. Poirot observed this exchange with the focused attention of a master craftsman examining a particularly intricate mechanism, but even as the emotional drama unfolded, his little grey cells were working with methodical precision, cataloguing details that others might overlook. "These documents Mademoiselle Roquefort entrusted to you, Doctor. What became of them after her death?" "I kept them," Thornfield admitted reluctantly. "They seemed too important to destroy, yet I lacked the legal expertise to pursue her claims. Eventually, they became simply another burden of guilt I carried." "Until Lady Pemberton began her own investigation," Poirot observed. "She discovered your connection to the Roquefort family and demanded your cooperation in making amends." While this psychological revelation unfolded, Poirot had been conducting his own quiet investigation. He approached Mr. Whitmore's leather portfolio, examining it with the delicate precision of a jeweler assessing a precious stone. The violet scent that had permeated the crime scene was faint but unmistakable, emanating not from any person present, but from the French leather treatment of the solicitor's case. "Monsieur Whitmore," Poirot said pleasantly, "this portfolio of yours, French leather, treated with orris and violet. Most distinctive." The solicitor's discomfort was evident. "A gift from my Paris office. If my case carries a scent, Mr. Poirot, surely that cannot constitute evidence of wrongdoing." But Poirot's attention had already shifted to more concrete evidence. In the study, he had observed a tiny curl of sealing wax near Lady Pemberton's desk, blue-black wax of the type used by legal offices. The positioning suggested someone had leaned across the desk while handling sealed documents, inadvertently leaving this trace. "Inspector Bradshaw," Poirot requested, "might we verify what time Mr. Whitmore's office sealed certain documents for Lady Pemberton, and with what type of wax?" As the inspector dispatched a constable to make inquiries, Poirot's mind was assembling a more complex picture. The violet perfume planted in Diana's bag, the convenient testimony about her presence near the study, the missing threatening letters that Whitmore claimed to possess, all pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. But it was Dr. Thornfield's medical diagnosis that provided the most crucial insight. Poirot recalled the physician's swift assessment. "She has been struck upon the head. The blow was severe, but she lives." Yet when Poirot had examined Lady Pemberton, he had noted not the broad trauma of a blow, but a precise mark just below the angle of her jaw, exactly where medical knowledge would suggest pressure could render someone unconscious without permanent harm. The realization struck him with crystalline clarity. Dr. Thornfield, with his specialized knowledge, had not diagnosed Lady Pemberton's condition. He had created it. The blow to the head was deliberate misdirection, designed to conceal the true method of attack. "Doctor," Poirot said quietly, his green eyes bright with understanding, "your diagnosis was most precise. Tell me, in your medical training, did you study the pressure points that can render a patient unconscious? Most useful knowledge for a physician or for someone wishing to incapacitate without permanent harm." Dr. Thornfield's face went ashen. The psychological pressure that had been building throughout the evening finally reached its breaking point as he realized that his medical expertise, the very skill that had enabled the crime, was now exposing him. The hidden clue was not physical evidence, but knowledge itself, the specialized understanding that only a trained physician would possess. Poirot had found the thread that would unravel the entire web of deception, revealing how forgotten promises from decades past had driven a desperate man to attempt murder in the elegant drawing rooms of Belgravia. The little grey cells had whispered their secret at last. Dr. Thornfield's face had gone ashen at Poirot's revelation about the specialized medical knowledge required for the attack. But it was the psychological weight of decades-old guilt that truly broke his composure. His hands trembled as he removed his spectacles, cleaning them with mechanical precision while his mind raced to find some escape from the net of logic that was tightening around him. "Your medical expertise, Doctor," Poirot continued with relentless gentleness, provided both the means and the motive. You alone possessed the knowledge to render Lady Pemberton unconscious without permanent harm, and you alone understood the full implications of her intended restitution to the Rochefort family. Miss Rochefort stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill. Dr. Thornfield, my grandmother's journals mentioned you often. She wrote that you promised to help her reclaim what was stolen from our family, but those documents you held, they were never used, were they? The physician's shoulders sagged under the weight of this accusation. Celeste was dying when she gave me those papers. I was young, inexperienced in legal matters. By the time I understood their significance, she was gone, and I convinced myself that the past was better left buried. Until Lady Pemberton's investigation threatened to expose your failure, Poirot observed. Her telegram to Miss Rochefort spoke of fulfilling her mother's promise, but it was your broken promise that truly motivated tonight's desperate act. Inspector Bradshaw had been following this exchange with growing understanding, but his policeman's instincts demanded concrete evidence. Mr. Poirot, this psychological analysis is fascinating, but we need proof of the doctor's guilt beyond his medical knowledge and past failures. It was then that Mrs. Reeves appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Begging your pardon, but her ladyship has awakened. She's asking for Mr. Poirot most urgently, and she keeps repeating something about the wrong hands and the safe place. This development sent a visible shock through the assembled company. Dr. Thornfield went rigid, while Diana Pemberton gasped with relief at news of her aunt's recovery. Sir Reginald leaned forward with obvious interest, and Mr. Whitmore clutched his remaining papers more tightly. Most illuminating, Poirot murmured, his green eyes bright with satisfaction. Lady Pemberton's consciousness returns at precisely the moment when the truth begins to emerge. Perhaps her little grey cells were working even while she appeared unconscious. As we prepared to visit the recovering victim, Poirot made a subtle but significant observation. Doctor, you diagnosed Lady Pemberton's condition with remarkable speed and certainty. Yet now that she has regained consciousness, you seem more distressed than relieved, most curious for a physician whose patient has recovered. Dr. Thornfield's medical training warred with his growing panic. I am naturally concerned about possible complications from the head trauma. But there was no head trauma, was there? Poirot interrupted smoothly. Only the precise application of pressure to render her temporarily unconscious. You see, mes amis, the good doctor's medical knowledge betrays him at every turn. He knows exactly what he did and what the consequences should be. The psychological pressure was now unbearable. Dr. Thornfield looked around the room at faces that had once regarded him with respect and trust, seeing now only suspicion and dawning comprehension. The weight of 40 years of guilt, combined with the immediate terror of exposure, was crushing his carefully maintained facade. The necklace, he whispered, almost to himself. She was going to give away everything, not just the jewel, but the truth about what I could have done, should have done decades ago. Poirot nodded with gentle understanding. And so you acted to prevent that revelation, using your medical skills to incapacitate her, then staging the scene to suggest a violent robbery. But Lady Pemberton proved more resourceful than you anticipated, did she not? Before Dr. Thornfield could respond, Inspector Bradshaw was already moving toward him with professional efficiency. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, I'm placing you under arrest for the assault of Lady Evelyn Pemberton and the theft of the necklace of forgotten promises. But even as the handcuffs clicked into place, Poirot held up a restraining hand. One moment, Inspector. I believe Lady Pemberton's message about the wrong hands and the safe place suggests that this case may yet hold surprises. The final gathering she approaches, but the complete truth that remains to be revealed. The fog outside had begun to lift with the approaching dawn, but inside Pemberton House, the mystery had reached its most crucial juncture. The hidden clue had been found, the psychological game had reached its climax, and now only the final revelation remained to complete Hercule Poirot's most intricate deduction. The drawing room at Pemberton House had been transformed into a theatre of justice, with every chair and settee arranged in a careful semicircle facing the ornate marble fireplace. Lady Pemberton, though pale and bearing a silk bandage at her throat, had insisted upon joining the assembly. She sat in her favourite chair, supported by cushions, her eyes bright with an intelligence that the evening's trauma had not dimmed. Beside her, Miss Lila Rochfort maintained the dignified bearing that had marked her dramatic entrance into this affair. Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled company with the measured confidence of a master craftsman about to reveal his finest work. His small figure commanded attention through sheer force of intellect, every detail of his appearance speaking of meticulous precision. Dr. Thornfield sat under guard, his medical bag confiscated, while Mr. Whitmore clutched his leather portfolio with white-knuckled determination. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying the cadence of absolute certainty, "we have gathered to witness the resolution of what appeared to be a simple theft, but which has proven to be something far more intricate. A web of forgotten promises, buried guilt, and desperate conspiracy spanning decades." His green eyes moved systematically across each face, cataloguing reactions with the precision of a portrait artist. The crime, as it first presented itself, seemed designed to implicate Miss Diana Pemberton with almost theatrical precision. The violet perfume in her evening bag, the ink stain upon her wrap, the convenient testimony placing her near the scene, all pointing to a young woman desperate to prevent the loss of her inheritance. Diana's relief was evident as she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Poirot, I cannot express my gratitude for your belief in my innocence. But you see, mademoiselle, while you did not commit the crimes of which you were accused, you were not entirely truthful about your activities this evening." Poirot's tone remained gentle but inexorable. "You did search your aunt's study before the authorities arrived, but not for threatening letters. You sought the codicil itself, hoping to understand why you would be disinherited so suddenly." "Yes," Diana admitted reluctantly, "but the desk had already been thoroughly searched by someone else. The papers were scattered as if someone had been looking for specific documents." "Precisely as I suspected," Poirot nodded with satisfaction. "You see, mes amis, tonight's crime involved not one but two conspirators, each with distinct motives and methods. Dr. Thornfield possessed the specialized medical knowledge required to incapacitate Lady Pemberton without permanent harm, while Mr. Whitmore provided the legal expertise necessary to understand the full implications and to craft the elaborate deception. Inspector Bradshaw stepped forward with professional interest. "Two conspirators, Mr. Poirot. The evidence seemed to point clearly to Dr. Thornfield alone." "The evidence was carefully arranged to create that impression," Poirot replied. "But consider the threatening letters that Mr. Whitmore claimed to possess. Inspector, your investigation revealed that the paper bore watermarks matching Whitmore and Gray's correspondence sheets, and the sealing wax found in Lady Pemberton's study matched that used by his office." Mr. Whitmore's face had gone ashen. "That proves nothing conclusive. As Lady Pemberton's solicitor, my materials would naturally be present in her study." "Indeed," Poirot agreed pleasantly, "but not in the pattern we observed. The letters were written to create the impression of external threats, when in reality they came from within Lady Pemberton's own circle of trusted advisers. You wrote them, Monsieur Whitmore, to pressure her into abandoning her investigation into the Rochfort family claims." Lady Pemberton's voice, though weak, carried unmistakable authority. "I had discovered the connection between Dr. Thornfield and Celeste Rochfort through my own research. When I confronted Marcus with the evidence of his broken promises, he came to you, James, seeking legal advice about the potential consequences." "The consequences were indeed severe," Poirot continued, his gaze fixed upon the two men. "Miss Rochfort's grandmother was not merely a political exile, but the legitimate daughter of the Comte de Rochfort, heir to estates worth far more than anyone realized. The documents Dr. Thornfield had hidden for 40 years contained proof of this inheritance. Proof that could still be used to reclaim properties seized during the political upheavals of 1847. Miss Rochefort gasped, her hands flying to her throat. My grandmother was legitimate nobility. Indeed, mademoiselle, and both Dr. Thornfield and Mr. Whitmore understood that your legitimate claim, if proven, would expose not only the doctor's moral failure, but potentially create legal liability for the suppression of crucial documents. When Lady Pemberton threatened to reveal this truth and make restitution, they acted in desperate concert. Sir Reginald, his expertise in such matters evident, leaned forward with interest. The legal ramifications would have been extraordinary. If Miss Rochefort could prove legitimate descent, the French properties might still be recoverable under current international law. Precisely, Poirot confirmed. And so, when Lady Pemberton retired to her study to finalize the codicil that would begin this process of justice, Dr. Thornfield followed. Using his medical knowledge, he applied pressure to a specific nerve point below her jaw, rendering her unconscious without leaving visible trauma. This explains why his initial diagnosis spoke of a blow to the head. He wished to conceal the true, more subtle method of incapacitation. But the necklace, Inspector Bradshaw interjected. Where is the necklace of forgotten promises? How did it disappear from the locked study? Poirot's eyes twinkled with the satisfaction of a magician about to reveal his greatest trick. Ah, Inspector, you assume the necklace disappeared. But what if I told you that the necklace never left Lady Pemberton's person? What if the theft was as carefully staged as the evidence against Miss Diana? He turned to address Lady Pemberton directly. Madame, when you spoke of the safe place, you were not referring to your safe, were you? You had anticipated the danger and taken precautions. Lady Pemberton smiled with quiet triumph. I had already removed the true necklace of forgotten promises before the evening began. What I wore to the soirée was a careful replica I had commissioned months ago when I first began to suspect treachery among my trusted circle. The revelation struck the assembled company like lightning. Poirot nodded approvingly. The real necklace, the one that belonged to Celeste Rochefort, was safely hidden in the hollowed spine of your mother's first edition of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in your study, a book so familiar that no searcher would think to examine it closely. As if summoned by his words, a constable appeared carrying the leather-bound volume. With theatrical precision, Poirot opened the book to reveal a cleverly concealed compartment within its spine. From this hiding place, he produced the magnificent necklace of forgotten promises, its deep blue sapphire gleaming under the gaslight like a captured piece of midnight sky. Dr. Thornfield, in his panic and haste, seized what he believed to be the genuine article, Poirot explained. Mr. Whitmore then helped stage the theft, planting evidence against Miss Diana, while secreting the replica in his portfolio, intending to dispose of it later and complete the illusion of a successful robbery. Inspector Bradshaw's understanding was complete. The violet perfume, the threatening letters, the convenient witness testimony, all carefully orchestrated to frame Miss Pemberton while concealing the true motive. Exactly so, Poirot confirmed. But the little grey cells, they whispered the truth. The medical expertise required for the assault, the legal knowledge necessary for the deception, the intimate familiarity with Lady Pemberton's habits and household, all pointed to conspiracy between her most trusted advisors. As the handcuffs clicked into place on both men, Lady Pemberton reached out to take Miss Rochefort's hand. My dear, the necklace is yours by right, as are the documents that will help you reclaim your family's true inheritance. Tonight, the promises forgotten for so long are finally remembered. The fog outside had lifted completely with the approaching dawn, and inside Pemberton House, justice had been served with the elegant precision that only Hercule Poirot could provide. The final gathering had revealed not just a crime, but the restoration of a legacy that had waited decades for its rightful heir. The first light of dawn streamed through the tall windows of Pemberton House as Inspector Bradshaw supervised the removal of Dr. Thornfield and Mr. Whitmore, their conspiracy finally exposed in all its desperate complexity. The fog that had shrouded Belgravia through the night had lifted completely, revealing a November morning crisp with clarity, a fitting metaphor for the truth that Hercule Poirot's little grey cells had finally illuminated. Poirot stood before the ornate fireplace, the genuine necklace of forgotten promises gleaming in his gloved hands as he delivered his final exposition. The conspiracy, mes amis, was as elegant as it was desperate. Two men, each possessing specialized knowledge crucial to the crime's success, united by fear of exposure and the weight of decades-old guilt. His green eyes moved, systematically across the assembled faces. Dr. Thornfield possessed the medical expertise to render Lady Pemberton unconscious through precise pressure to the carotid nerve, a technique that left no visible trauma while creating the illusion of a violent assault. Mr. Whitmore provided the legal sophistication necessary to understand the full implications of the Rochefort claim and to orchestrate the elaborate deception that followed. Lady Pemberton, though pale from her ordeal, listened with evident satisfaction as Poirot continued. The threatening letters were fabricated on Whitmore's own stationery, the violet perfume planted in Miss Diana's evening bag, the convenient witness testimony carefully arranged. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the most obvious suspect, the disinherited niece with the strongest apparent motive. With ceremonial precision, Lady Pemberton fastened the authentic necklace around Miss Lila Rochefort's throat. "My dear, this belonged to your grandmother by right, as do the documents that will help you reclaim your family's true inheritance. I had suspected treachery among my trusted circle and took precautions. The necklace I wore tonight was merely a replica, commissioned months ago when I first sensed danger." The revelation of Lady Pemberton's foresight drew gasps of admiration from the assembled company. Sir Reginald stepped forward with professional interest. "The legal ramifications will be extraordinary. If Miss Rochefort can prove legitimate descent from the Comte de Rochefort, properties seized during the 1847 upheavals might still be recoverable under current international law." Miss Rochefort, tears streaming down her face, could barely speak. "My grandmother died believing her honor would never be restored. To think that justice was merely delayed, not denied." Diana Pemberton approached her aunt with genuine gratitude, mixed with newfound understanding. "Aunt Evelyn, I confess I searched your study before the authorities arrived, seeking to understand why I was being disinherited so suddenly. But someone had already ransacked your papers thoroughly." "That would have been our conspirators," Poirot observed, searching desperately for the documents that proved Miss Rochefort's claim, documents they believed Dr. Thornfield had destroyed decades ago, but which Lady Pemberton had independently discovered through her own research. Inspector Bradshaw, his professional skepticism finally satisfied, shook his head in wonder. "The psychological pressure you applied, Mr. Poirot, broke their conspiracy more effectively than any physical evidence. 40 years of buried guilt proved too heavy a burden when confronted with imminent exposure." As the morning progressed and the household began to return to normalcy, Poirot prepared to take his leave. He paused at the threshold, his small figure silhouetted against the brightening day, and delivered his characteristic philosophical observation. "Have witnessed tonight the eternal struggle between conscience and expedience, between justice long delayed and truth ultimately triumphant. Dr. Thornfield carried the weight of his broken promise to Celeste Rochefort for 4 decades. When Lady Pemberton threatened to expose not merely his moral failure, but its legal consequences, desperation drove him to acts his younger, more idealistic self would never have contemplated. He adjusted his tie with meticulous precision. The human heart, mes amis, cannot long bear the weight of guilt and fear. Truth, like water, will always find its way to the surface. The necklace of forgotten promises has reminded us that some debts transcend generations, and some obligations cannot be buried beneath years of silence. With a final flourish of his hat, Hercule Poirot stepped into the crisp London air. The little grey cells, they are satisfied. Justice has been served, promises have been kept, and the guilty have received their just reward. What more can one ask of a November morning in Belgravia? Behind him, he left a household where truth had triumphed over deception, where forgotten promises had finally been remembered, and where the patient application of logic and psychology had once again proven that no conspiracy, however clever, could long withstand the relentless pursuit of justice. The case of the necklace of forgotten promises was closed, but its lesson would endure, that the past, no matter how carefully buried, will always find its way into the light when truth demands its due.